Hi everyone, I'm Dr.Animaction. Welcome at last to the next entry in the Doctor's Deep Dives, where I choose an animated series to look at in detail. That series for today's video is going to be 1983's fantasy adventure Dungeons & Dragons. Interestingly, based on the file dates on my previous scripts, I started the deep dives almost exactly a year ago, and in that year have managed to cover a whole 6 shows. I really need to get on a set schedule, but I guess that's an ongoing issue for another time. Next week, at least, I'm planning the next personnel office entry covering rock and roll, while I continue working on the animated 70s. For now, though, we'll just tackle the topic at hand and see how our young party does in their battle against Venger and the forces of evil. Dungeons & Dragons starts out in the real world of the 1980s, with a group of young friends enjoying a day at an amusement park. These 6 kids are a pretty odd group, consisting of the older 15-year-olds all the way down to the youngest, Bobby, who comes in at just 8 years old. They also have a couple of jocks, a nerd, a rich kid, just a bunch of people you wouldn't expect to be friends. Anyway, at the park they come across a ride based on the popular role-playing game and primary target of Satanic Panic at the time, Dungeons & Dragons. While on the ride, which seems to be a take on some sort of a haunted house, even though I think they refer to it as a roller coaster, they're transported into the actual world of the game by some magical occurrence of unidentified origin. I guess there was just a momentary portal that appeared in the tracks of that ride for no reason. Luckily for them, it's the core D&D world. It would have been a significantly different show if they'd ended up somewhere like Ravenloft, though that's a show I'd love to see. Upon arrival, they immediately meet the enigmatic Dungeon Master, a powerful magic user who grants them each an enchanted item in class-appropriate outfits. I find it odd that he's pretty much right there waiting for them, and it makes me wonder if he's not the one to have transported them in the first place to fight the big bad. If that's the case, I'm not sure why he chose kids instead of a team of Navy SEALs or something, but I guess it's probably best not to read too deeply into it and simply enjoy it as a narrative device to get the cartoon rolling. We end up with a party pretty much straight out of publisher TSR's Advanced Dungeons & Dragons sourcebooks, or at least future sourcebooks. Not the core sourcebooks, mind you, because there were also mechanisms to increase interest in the expansion modules, but sourcebooks nonetheless. Together, Hank the Ranger, Eric the Cavalier, Diana the Acrobat, Presto the Magician, Sheila the Thief, and Bobby the Barbarian, along with Baby Unicorn Uni, and supported by Dungeon Master, set off to find their way home. As I've already mentioned, and as is probably quite obvious, this cartoon is based on the pen and paper role-playing game of the same name created by Gary Gygax in 1974. Set in a high fantasy world full of magic and monsters, the game was a certified cultural phenomenon that by the time of the cartoon release boasted more than 3 million players worldwide and sales of more than 750,000 books each year. With numbers like that, it seemed like the perfect time to release a show to attract even more players of a younger demographic. With new supplements on the horizon like the Unearthed Arcana, it was also a good way to introduce new upcoming classes like the Acrobat, Barbarian, and Cavalier. Unfortunately, fortuitous timing wasn't necessarily the case, as several parents were already focused on the game as one of the major targets of the aforementioned Satanic Panic gripping people at the time. The game had been cited as a contributing factor in at least one disappearance and one, self-ending of vital functions. And although there was no evidence of there ever being any connection between the game and the disappearance, and a court dismissed any connection in the second case I spoke about, the fire was being fueled. The year prior to the cartoon coming out saw the release of a Tom Hanks starring movie called Mazes and Monsters in 1982, which presented a fictionalized and exaggerated version of a D&D player who becomes so obsessed with the game that it takes over his life and starts blurring his perception of the real world, using the circulating unfounded rumors to further vilify the game. Worst of all, the mother of the second case I mentioned about that word that I don't want to say in a video, who had already unsuccessfully tried to sue both TSR and her son's Dungeon Master, whom she claimed placed a real curse on him during the course of their gaming, started the parents group Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons, or BAD.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
This happened the same year of the cartoon premiering, and somehow the movement gained a huge backing of conservative Christian and evangelical groups and managed to garner significantly more media attention than it deserved. Essentially, they were campaigning to convince people the game was an occult tool of the devil and that its players took part in everything from witchcraft to cannibalism and even homosexuality during gaming sessions.
Who could trick us into doing that? Could have been Satan.
Although the show proved to be incredibly popular and managed a run of 3 years, It seems to have done so somewhat stealthily, only managing 27 episodes, with most of those subject to including warnings about the dangers of the game. Looking to expand interest in the Dungeons & Dragons property in the early 80s, TSR set out to find a partner with whom to produce the animated series. That partner was Marvel Productions, and their frequent collaborators Toei Animation. Together, the three companies set out to create something for the Saturday morning crowd that was darker and better animated than anything else on at the time. A team consisting of Mark Evanier, who had previously been the story developer on Plastic Man and Thundar the Barbarian, Dennis Marks, who had been a story developer on several earlier Hanna-Barbera works and was actually the creator of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and Kevin Paul Coates, who had previously written for Battle of the Planets, went to work developing the world of D&D into something that fit in a weekly TV format. John Gibbs, who up until this point had been an animator, was assigned as the director of the series, which was his first time occupying that role. He'd later move on to direct most of the Sunbow episodes of G.I. Joe and the majority of Defenders of the Earth. Meanwhile, production designer and art director Takashi Masunaga was creating the look and style of the series, designing each of the models that would be used, a job he'd previously done on a number of cartoons over a career that had started in 1966. For voice talent, they brought in mainly actors from live-action backgrounds, including Willie Ames and Adam Rich from 8 is Enough as Hank and Presto, respectively, Don Most, who had played Ralph the Mouth on Happy Days, as Eric, Katie Lee as Sheila, which was the start of a very prolific career in voice acting that would include Sonny Gummy on The Gummy Bears and Rolf on Muppet Babies, and longtime character actor Sidney Miller as Dungeon Master. The cast also included Teddy Field III as Bobby and Tanya Gale Smith as Diana, both of whom have very few and no additional credits respectively on IMDb. However, there wasn't a complete lack of experience in the voice acting department, as Peter Cullen provided the voice of Venger, and Frank Welker played the parts of Uni the Unicorn and the dragon Tiamat, among others. With Toei providing some crisp, bright animation and a talented voice cast supported by scripts by a revolving door of writers, including Batman the Animated Series co-creator Paul Dini, Dungeons & Dragons premiered on CBS on September 17, 1983. The series ran for 27 episodes over 3 seasons before being unceremoniously canceled with an unfinished finale as ratings trailed off. The Dungeons & Dragons cartoon was a huge success, leading the ratings in its time slot for over most of its run, succeeding in appealing to the younger audience in spite of Bad's effort. The show spawned a licensed board game based directly on one of its episodes, and a series of choose-your-own-adventure type books called Pick-a-Path that each focused on one of the characters. That's pretty much it for merchandise and an expanded universe directly from the show, but it did open the door for a line of advanced Dungeons & Dragons action figures featuring more age-appropriate warriors. The show didn't necessarily increase the popularity of the game overall, which was already surging at the time, but it did definitely introduce it to a whole new crowd. What the show lacked in reach at the time, though, it more than made up for in legacy. The characters and setting were adopted into official D&D lore as part of the 3.5 version, with Wizards of the Coast, who took over the property from TSR, which is kind of a long story for another time, produced DVD pack-in called Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 Animated Series Handbook. And they also made an appearance in tabletop form as recently as this year with the adventure Uni and the Hunt for the Lost Horn, which was released digitally as part of the D&D Beyond toolset. The characters have also appeared in several comics, at least one of which canonically puts them in the Forgotten Realms setting by crossing them over with that Greenwood's Elminster character. We also finally got the toys we were all missing in the 80s, with the release of the Hasbro Cartoon Classics line of figures this year. Hell, the characters even made a live-action appearance, having cameos in the Chris Pine-led Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves from 2023. So, did the D&D cartoon change the world of role-playing games? No. Did it result in them becoming extra popular? Probably not. Did it turn an entire generation of cartoon fans into RPG players? Speaking solely for myself, definitely. Sure, my mom may not have let me watch things like He-Man and this.
Cultic heroes are being lifted up as gods before our children, and our children are receiving them as such. One of them is He-Man.
But as long as she wasn't around, I was able to sneak in a few episodes of that in this series here and there. As pure wish fulfillment, this one ranks pretty high. And as an adult who's continued to grow as the game has, it's actually kind of a little hard to watch something that so obviously hasn't. But you can't argue with the nostalgia rush that comes with it. I can't see it holding up in today's animated market or gaining many younger fans, but the fact it still has a presence mean that those of us who experienced it while it was new still feel the love for it 40 years later. Although we may be a couple of weeks early, happy 41st birthday to the Dungeons & Dragons animated series. We're happy to have known you. That's it for this episode though. Check back soon for the next Personnel Office and join me live again next Friday for the 80s Cartoon Tier Ranking, Part 2. Check out all my things in the description and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. As always, stay tuned and stay tuned, as in cartoons. Later.